The afternoon sun had just started dipping behind the neighbours' maple trees, casting long shadows across our backyard. I was sitting on the edge of the pool, the water still warm from the day's sun, laughing with Jess as we reminisced about old college memories. It was the kind of moment you want to bottle up and never let go, a rare bubble of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic neighbourhood. Then it happened. A sharp, insistent knock echoed through the sliding glass door. I froze, the laugh caught in my throat. Not because anyone ever knocks on our door unannounced, but because I knew that knock. The one that made my stomach tighten and my blood pressure spike. Karen. I peeked through the blinds and saw her standing there, arms crossed, glaring like she was personally offended by our very existence. The corners of her mouth twitched in that familiar scowl, the one that's both judgmental and, honestly, terrifyingly smug. "Hey," Jess said softly, following my gaze. She tilted her head, a little nervous but mostly amused. "Your friend again?" "Neighborhood terrorist," I muttered under my breath. Karen's voice cut through the humid air like a whistle. "I need to talk to you right now," I exhaled slowly, trying to hide my irritation behind a polite smile. "Sure, Karen. Come on in." The moment she stepped onto the deck, the atmosphere changed. You know that instant when tension doesn't just sit in the room, it presses against your chest, makes your skin crawl. That. Karen didn't even wait to sit down. She started with the usual complaints about lawn regulations, the noise from our pool, and, oddly, how close Jess and I were sitting. Jess raised an eyebrow. "We're just sitting," she said, trying not to laugh. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Sitting too close. It's inappropriate. People are watching." I blinked. "People? Karen, it's just us." But Karen didn't hear me. She was on a rampage now, pointing fingers and spitting words sharp enough to cut glass. I could feel my pulse racing, the adrenaline mingling with a strange sense of disbelief. Who actually gets this worked up over two friends sitting side by side? And then she did something I didn't expect. She stepped closer, practically looming over us, her face twisting in shock as her eyes darted between Jess and me. There was this sudden, very human pause in her tirade, like she'd walked into a reality she wasn't prepared to handle. Jess laughed nervously, whispering, Karen?" But Karen wasn't laughing. She just stared. And in that moment, something shifted. The rules she thought she controlled seemed to wobble. And then, as if the universe wanted to punctuate the madness, she dropped her clipboard. The thud echoed louder than anything she'd said, and I swear I heard a collective gasp from the imaginary audience of neighbours she thought were watching. And that's when I realised this wasn't going to end with a simple warning or polite confrontation. Whatever came next, it was going to be messy. Karen's dropped clipboard lay like a silent accusation on the deck, but she didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Instead, her eyes were locked on us, scanning the space between Jess and me, as if she could physically measure the audacity of our closeness. I had to stifle a laugh, because the absurdity of it all was too much, but my pulse was still hammering. "Excuse me," she barked, finally bending to retrieve her fallen weapon of authority. This is unacceptable." Jess tilted her head, letting a small smirk escape. "Unacceptable? Karen, it's a poolside chat. That's literally it." Karen's nostrils flared. "Don't play innocent. You're crossing boundaries. I've seen it with my own eyes." At this point, I realized that arguing facts with Karen was like trying to reason with a hurricane. I took a slow breath, trying to channel patience I didn't really feel. "Karen, we're just friends. No one is..." "Friends!" she interrupted, voice rising an octave. "You call this just friendly?" Her hand gestured wildly, almost knocking over my iced tea. The condensation from the glass left wet rings on the wooden deck, tiny footprints of chaos. Jess reached over and gently held my hand under the table, a quiet grounding presence. "Karen, you might want to calm down before you embarrass yourself further," she said, tone light but firm. That seemed to hit a nerve. Karen's face flushed crimson, and she stepped even closer, the air between us thick enough to slice with a knife. "Calm down. I am calm, but I will not stand idly by while..." She faltered, searching for words. "While this Closeness happens in my neighborhood. I wanted to tell her that her neighborhood obsession was becoming pathological, but instead I just smiled, letting the tension hang in the air. There was a strange thrill in watching her unravel, like witnessing a slow-motion car crash. Then came the moment that made my stomach drop. Karen, in her fury, leaned too far forward, and her foot caught the edge of the pool. The resulting splash sent water spraying across her shoes and pants. Jess stifled a laugh, but Karen froze, water dripping down her heels. Her mouth opened as if to shout, but no words came out. For a split second, the fierce HOA warlord was reduced to a soggy, stunned figure. And in that pause, Jess and I shared a look, an unspoken acknowledgement that we were closer than ever, not because of malice, but because shared absurdity has a funny way of bonding people. Karen finally recovered, shaking her soaked sleeve like a wet dog, muttering about rules, property lines, and decency. But I noticed the shift. Her fury was still there, but now it was laced with confusion, almost disbelief. She hadn't expected this calm defiance from us, this subtle rebellion without a fight. And just as I thought we might finally escape the worst of her wrath, Karen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her eyes widening. Then, with a strangled yell, she pointed outside the yard. "You!" And that's when I saw it. A new threat creeping across the lawn, one that could make this encounter far worse than we imagined. Karen's finger jabbed toward the far end of the yard, trembling like a warning flag. I followed her gaze and froze. A cluster of neighbors had gathered, hidden just beyond the fence, peeking through the gaps as if they were watching a live drama unfold. Some faces were curious, others shocked, and a few looked downright scandalized. Jess let out a low whistle. "Oh, they are watching." Karen's lips curled into a triumphant, almost predatory smile. "See? People are watching. This is what happens when boundaries are crossed." Her voice had that brittle edge, the kind that shakes the ground without moving an inch. I felt a surge of something between frustration and amusement. The truth was, their curiosity didn't bother me, but Karen's theatrics did. And Jess? She leaned closer, whispering, "You okay?" Her breath tickled my ear, sending a little shiver down my spine, and I realized just how close we'd become without even noticing. Karen took a dramatic step forward, waving her arms like a conductor orchestrating chaos. This is unacceptable. I demand that you..." And then it happened. A gust of wind ripped through the yard, scattering Karen's carefully stacked HOA pamphlets across the grass. They fluttered like dying birds, leaving her scrambling to collect them. I bit back a laugh, and Jess tried to stifle hers too. Karen's face turned beet red, eyes narrowing into twin lasers of fury. You're mocking me." "Nope," I said, voice steady. "Just enjoying the chaos." Her glare shifted between us, then darted to the neighbors again. "Do any of you agree with this?" she demanded. Silence. One elderly man mumbled something incoherent. A woman behind him rolled her eyes. Karen's confidence faltered, but only for a heartbeat. And then, like the plot twist you didn't see coming, she stepped closer, nearly toppling herself into the pool this time. Jess grabbed my arm and whispered, "Careful. This is about to get really messy." Karen's hands flew to her hips, dripping wet from the earlier splash, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she squared her shoulders and stomped her foot. "I will not allow this," she barked. And in that exact moment, she lost her balance, flailing dramatically, and landed, half in the pool, half on the deck. Water sprayed everywhere, soaking her hair, her blouse, her already miserable shoes. Time seemed to slow. Karen's horror movie scream echoed across the yard. The neighbors gasped, some ducked, and I could hardly breathe from laughing so hard. Jess grabbed a towel and handed it to me, but I was too busy watching Karen, soaked and sputtering, fury mixing with humiliation. Then I realized something. In all her outrage, all her obsession with rules, Karen had made a critical error. She had distracted herself completely, leaving the gate to the backyard slightly ajar. And from the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow slipping silently into the yard. Someone, or something, was moving closer, unnoticed by Karen. Or us. And that's when my chest tightened. Whatever was coming next, it was bigger than spilled water, bigger than HOA rage. It was about to make this entire encounter explode. The shadow moved closer, gliding silently across the lawn toward us. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure Karen would hear it and scream again. Jess tightened her grip on my arm, eyes wide with a mix of thrill and fear. I whispered, "Stay calm. Let's see what we're dealing with." Karen, still dripping from her pool tumble, hadn't noticed the newcomer. She was too busy trying to wring water out of her blouse, muttering about decency and neighborhood decorum. But then, the shadow stepped into the sunlight, and my stomach flipped. It was her son, the one who had probably inherited some of her obsessive tendencies, except he looked just as shocked as we were. His jaw dropped, eyes darting between Karen, Jess, and me. Karen's reaction was instantaneous. She froze, mouth wide open, and a strangled, "No, no, this isn't," escaped her lips. Jess leaned toward me, barely suppressing a laugh. "Well, that's awkward," she whispered. Karen spun toward her son, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. You saw this?" she demanded, pointing at us, at the closeness, at the laughter, at everything. Her composure was completely gone. Her son raised his hands defensively. "Mom, I don't even..." Karen's eyes blazed. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Inappropriate. Unacceptable." And then it happened. The combination of embarrassment, chaos, and pure adrenaline created a surreal moment of clarity. For me, for Jess, and maybe, reluctantly, for Karen too. I saw her falter, realizing that her obsession with control had led her into a spectacular, wet, humiliating mess. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "Karen, maybe you're overreacting." Her glare could have burned through the deck, but for the first time, I noticed hesitation flicker across her face. The neighbors watching from the fence leaned in, holding their collective breaths, witnessing the unraveling of the neighborhood queen of rules. Jess squeezed my hand, a quiet anchor in the chaos. "Karen, it's just us. No one else is involved. No harm done." Karen's chest heaved. She looked at her son, then at the damp pile of pamphlets on the ground, then at us. For a long, heavy moment, there was nothing but silence, broken only by the dripping of water from her hair. Then, finally, a long sigh escaped her lips. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. You will learn proper boundaries," she muttered, voice quieter, subdued, but still carrying authority. "But maybe not everyone is a threat." Jess and I exchanged a glance, a mix of triumph and disbelief. Karen had survived her meltdown, but the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, she was just a human, struggling with the same ridiculousness we all endure sometimes. As Karen and her son retreated to their house, dripping and muttering, I felt the tension finally lift. The sun dipped lower, painting the yard gold, and for the first time that day, it felt like victory wasn't about chaos or humiliation. It was about connection. Jess and I sat closer, laughed quietly, and realized that sometimes the best way to survive a Karen meltdown is to stay calm, stay close, and let reality do the rest. And as the neighbors disappeared back behind their fences, whispering and shaking their heads, I couldn't help but smirk. Karen had walked in expecting to control everything, but the only thing she found was how close we had gotten. If this story hit home, smash that like, because ordinary people deserve to fight back. Subscribe to Karen Edition so you never miss real tales of standing your ground. And tell me in the comments, how would you handle a Karen like this?